Daredevil is one of Marvel's best characters. But that's not how he started. That's the part that people forget, because now when people think of Daredevil, they think Catholic guilt, brutal street fights, Kingpin, Bullseye, Elektra, courtroom speeches, broken bones, and Matt Murdock treating self-destruction like it's a spiritual discipline. But that's not where Daredevil begins. At the start, Daredevil is a bright, strange, and slightly confused Silver Age superhero with one of the strongest hooks that Marvel ever created. Blind lawyer, enhanced senses, acrobat, devil costume, murdered father, and a life split between the courtroom and the rooftops. The pieces are all there from the very start, but the character doesn't fully become himself for years. Because Daredevil's real identity isn't just blind superhero or lawyer who fights crime. Daredevil only becomes Daredevil when creators finally understand the contradiction at the center of Matt Murdock. Matt believes in justice. Daredevil exists because justice keeps failing him. That's the character. Not the Billy Club, not the radar sense, and not even the stylized suit. The tension between law and justice, between law and violence, between faith and rage, between the man who wants to save people the right way and the man who keeps putting on horns because the right way never seems to reach far enough. That's why Daredevil works, and it takes Marvel a while to figure that out. Daredevil first debuts in Daredevil #1 in 1964, created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett with design input from the king, Jack Kirby. And the origin is strong from the get. Young Matt Murdock pushes a man out of the path of a truck carrying radioactive material. The accident blinds him, but it also heightens his other senses to superhuman levels. His father, battling Jack Murdock, is a boxer who wants Matt to use his mind instead of his fists. Then Jack is murdered, after refusing to throw a fight. And in some origins, he may be carrying a container with 4 turtles in it. But if you know, you know. That's a fantastic origin story. You have sacrifice, working class pressure, a father trying to protect his son from violence, a son secretly training his body anyway, and a murder that turns restraint into rage. The problem isn't the setup. The problem's the tone. Early Daredevil is charming, but he's not fully distinct yet. The original yellow and red costume is memorable, but it doesn't carry the weight that the character would eventually need. The stories have almost a swashbuckling quality to them. Matt fights villains like the Owl, Stiltman, the Matador, and Purple Man. Some of that is fun, and the Silver Age weirdness has its own energy, but Daredevil is still in pieces. He has Spider-Man's acrobatics, Batman's urban crime flavor, a legal drama hook, a disability angle, and devil imagery, but those ingredients haven't fused into one coherent identity yet. Early Daredevil has the material for greatness. He just doesn't have the wound yet. The first major correction comes when Wally Wood redesigns the costume into the famous all-red suit. That matters. The red suit finally makes the devil imagery feel intentional. It gives the character a visual identity that matches the name. But looking right and feeling right aren't the same thing. For years, Daredevil is a solid Marvel hero. He's just not yet essential. Before Frank Miller, Daredevil spends years trying on different versions of himself. And this era matters because it shows just how close Marvel was to the right answer without fully landing on it yet. Gene Colan's art is one of the first major steps forward. Colan gives the book movement, shadow, and fluidity. Daredevil is a character who needs motion. He can't just stand there like a power fantasy. His body is part of the storytelling. He flips, swings, twists, and moves through space like someone who experiences the world differently. And Colan understands that. Then you get the Black Widow era, where Matt moves to San Francisco and shares the title with Natasha Romanoff. And that version has some real appeal to it. It gives the book romance, espionage, superhero partnership, and a different kind of sophistication. But it also reveals something very important. Daredevil needs Hell's Kitchen more than most heroes need a setting. That doesn't mean every non-New York Daredevil story fails, but the farther Matt gets from the pressure of Hell's Kitchen, the more the character risks losing the friction that makes him work. Daredevil needs a city that pushes back, legal institutions that crack under pressure, organized crime that feels structural, friends and lovers who get pulled into the damage, and a moral world where every victory costs something. The pre-Miller years aren't wasted. They are the character circling the thing he will eventually become. Marvel has the lawyer, the acrobat, the costume, and the tragedy. What they don't have yet is the world that makes Matt Murdock hurt in the exact right way. That's when Frank Miller shows up. And suddenly, the whole book snaps into focus. See, Frank Miller doesn't just make Daredevil darker. That's the lazy version of the take. Miller makes Daredevil very specific. He takes the pieces that were already there and gives them an ecosystem. Kingpin becomes Matt's true archenemy. Bullseye becomes his most intimate kind of threat. Elektra becomes his past, his desire, and his failure all wrapped into one person. Stick in the hand, have a strange martial spiritual backstory to his training. Hell's Kitchen becomes less a place and more like a moral trap. Before Miller, Daredevil is a superhero who happens to be a lawyer. After Miller, Matt Murdock is a man trapped between systems that keep breaking: law, faith, family, love, violence, and his own inability to leave well enough alone. Elektra is the perfect example. She's not just Matt's old girlfriend with size. She is the life Matt might have had if grief and rage had pointed him somewhere darker. She's seductive because she understands his violence. She knows the part of him the law degree is trying to civilize. That's why her death matters as much as it does. When Bullseye kills Elektra, it doesn't just remove a love interest, it defines Bullseye forever as the villain who doesn't simply want to beat Daredevil. He wants to desecrate what Matt loves. That's a different kind of evil. And then there's Kingpin. Miller's Kingpin isn't just a big crime boss. He's institutional corruption in a white suit. He doesn't need to outfight Matt. He can outlast him, outresource him, outmaneuver him. That's what Daredevil needed. Bullseye attacks Matt's heart. Kingpin attacks his world. Once those two threats are in place, Daredevil finally has a mythology strong enough to match his premise. The character stops being Spider-Man, but legally depressed. He becomes Daredevil. Then Miller returns with Dave Mazzucchelli for Born Again. And this is where Daredevil becomes almost biblical. Karen Page sells Matt's secret identity. The information reaches Kingpin, and Fisk doesn't just try to kill Matt. That would be too small. Kingpin dismantles him, his career, his home, his finances, his reputation, his sanity, and his ability to trust reality. That's what makes Born Again one of the definitive Daredevil stories. It understands that Matt Murdock is not defeated by getting punched harder. He's defeated when the structures he believes in collapse. The law can't save him. His secret identity can't save him. His friends can barely reach him. His mind starts to fracture under the pressure. And Mazzucchelli's art is essential because it never lets the story float away into superhero abstraction. Matt looks human, exhausted, starving, and broken. The city feels dirty and indifferent. Kingpin feels less like a villain and more like a machine grinding one man into dust. But the title tells you the shape of it: Born Again. This is death and resurrection. Matt is stripped down to almost nothing, and the question becomes what is still there when everything else is gone. That's where the story finds the core of Daredevil. Matt Murdock is not the man without fear because he never breaks. He's the man without fear because breaking still doesn't stop him. That is the line every great Daredevil run eventually goes back to. After Miller, Ann Nocenti takes over and does the smartest thing she could have done. She does not just try to imitate Miller, and that matters, because after a run as defining as Miller's, the obvious trap would be to repeat the same language. More noir, more ninjas, more Kingpin, more Catholic suffering in the rain. Nocenti keeps the pain, but changes the pressure. Her Daredevil is political, surreal, angry, and often deeply strange. She pushes the book into corporate greed, environmental destruction, misogyny, poverty, media manipulation, and spiritual horror. It's not always tidy, but Daredevil shouldn't be too tidy. The biggest addition to the Daredevil mythology at this point is Typhoid Mary. And Typhoid Mary is a perfect Daredevil villain because she attacks Matt from multiple angles at once. She's not just an assassin. She's seduction, violence, fragmentation, performance, and a trap built specifically for Matt's weaknesses. Kingpin uses her as a part of a campaign to break Matt. And the strategy works because Mary doesn't only target Daredevil, she targets Matt Murdock too. One persona pulls at his compassion and attraction, another attacks him physically. Matt's senses, which usually make him harder to deceive, cannot fully save him from the split nature of who she is. That's such a Daredevil problem. Matt is drawn to wounded people. Matt is drawn to dangerous people. Matt is especially drawn to people who are both. Typhoid Mary turns that instinct against him, and then Nocenti keeps pushing the book outward. During Inferno, Daredevil is dragged into demonic chaos in Manhattan. Later, he ends up in increasingly surreal territory involving Blackheart and Mephisto. On paper, it sounds like it shouldn't work. Daredevil fighting demons can easily become absurd and ridiculous. But under Nocenti, the supernatural material often works because it externalizes what Matt is always dealing with anyway: temptation, sin, guilt, violence, the fear that his soul is not as clean as he wants it to be. Her run is far messier than Miller's, but that mess is part of the point. Nocenti understands that Daredevil is not just a crime character, he is a moral pressure cooker. You can throw politics, desire, capitalism, demons, and psychic assassins into the pressure cooker, and somehow It still comes back to Matt asking the same question: am I saving people, or am I just addicted to suffering near them? That's why her run matters. It proves Daredevil can survive beyond Miller's shadow without pretending Miller never happened. At this point, we move forward to the 1990s, and Daredevil is still drifting at this point. This is the era where Marvel tries to make the character feel more extreme, more modern, more visually aggressive. You get stories like Fall from Grace, The Armored Costume, Jack Batlin, Identity Complications, ninja adjacent mythologies, and attempts to make Daredevil feel bigger and more current. And to be fair, not all of it is worthless. There are ideas in this era. There's ambition. There are creators trying to keep the book alive in a market that rewarded louder designs, sharper edges, and constant escalation. But the problem is that Daredevil usually does not get better by becoming louder. He gets better by becoming more personal. The armored costume is the perfect symbol of the problem. On another character, maybe it works. On Matt, it feels like a misunderstanding. Daredevil does not need to look harder. He needs the story to press harder on who he is. That's the difference. You can add armor. You can add conspiracies, new identities, and mythology. But if the story isn't attacking Matt's law, guilt, faith, violence, love, or self image, then it doesn't really feel like Daredevil. It feels like someone put horns on a 90s action figure. And that's why this era is useful, even when it doesn't fully work. It proves the formula by breaking it. Daredevil is not built for scale first, he's built for consequence. Marvel eventually remembers that, and when it does, the character becomes one of the centerpieces of a creative reset for the company. In 1998, Daredevil becomes one of the pillars of the Marvel Knights line. And this matters because Marvel Knights isn't just a publishing label, it's a statement. Marvel is trying to make certain characters feel sharper, more mature, more creator driven, and more prestigious. Daredevil is perfect for that because the character already wants to live in that space. Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada relaunch him with Guardian Angel. And Guardian Angel isn't subtle. It throws Matt into a story involving a baby who may or may not be the Antichrist, religious panic, Mysterio manipulation, and the death of Karen Page. This story uses Catholic guilt like a brick through a stained glass window. And while people still debate parts of it historically, it does something important. It makes Daredevil matter again. It puts Matt's faith, grief, and vulnerability back at the center of the book. It reminds readers that Daredevil stories should feel like they're attacking the inside of Matt's soul, not just sending him after another costumed criminal. Karen's death is especially important because it closes a long, painful loop that began before Born Again. Karen had already been a part of Matt's fall. Now, she becomes another wound he has to carry. And it's brutal. Maybe too brutal. But Daredevil's history is full of creators testing how much grief this character can survive before the story becomes cruelty instead of drama. Guardian Angel walks that line. Then Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev arrive, and the book stops feeling like a relaunch and becomes a modern classic. Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev's run understands something essential about the character. Matt Murdock's secret identity isn't just a superhero gimmick, it's a load bearing wall for the character. So they knock it down. The core hook is that Matt is publicly accused of being Daredevil. His identity is exposed in the press, and the genius of the run is that Bendis doesn't treat it like a temporary inconvenience. He lets it poison everything. Matt denies it. The media circles him. The legal world reacts. Criminals react. Friends react. Every conversation now happens under the shadow of something everyone suspects and nobody can actually prove. That is a perfect Daredevil problem. Because Matt's a lawyer. His entire civilian life depends on credibility, control, and the ability to stand inside the law while secretly operating outside of it. Now, that contradiction is public, and he can't punch his way out of it. Maleev's art is a massive part of why this all works. The run feels grainy, paranoid, urban, and tired. People don't look like bright superhero icons. They look like they've been photographed through cigarette smoke and bad decisions. Bendis also does one of the best modern Kingpin arcs. Fisk rises and falls like a political institution. Criminal power is not just muscle, it's perception, loyalty, fear, and vacancy. When Kingpin falls, the underworld doesn't become safe, it becomes unstable. And Matt, being Matt, responds by overreacting. At one point, he effectively declares himself the new Kingpin of Hell's Kitchen. That's one of the most dangerous Matt Murdock ideas ever written. Because you understand why he does it, and you know immediately he shouldn't be doing it. That's where Bendis thrives. He writes Matt as a man whose desire to protect people keeps mutating into control. Not because Matt's evil, but because Matt is convinced his suffering gives him authority. And that might be the scariest version of Daredevil. He's not possessed, not corrupted by magic, just morally exhausted enough to confuse responsibility with ownership. Then Ed Brubaker and Michael Lark pick up from Bendis in quite possibly the smartest way possible. They don't reset. They trap Matt inside the consequences of his actions. Matt starts Brubaker's run in prison. And it's such a perfect Daredevil premise that it feels like the character was always moving that direction. A lawyer, a vigilante, a man obsessed with justice, now inside of his system as an inmate. And the opening prison arc, The Devil in Cell Block D, works because every layer of Matt's identity is compromised. As a lawyer, he understands the institution. As Daredevil, he's put some of these people away. As Matt Murdock, he has to survive without fully revealing what he can do. As a man, he has to face the fact that his double life has finally cornered him. Brubaker leans harder into crime fiction and noir. The world feels claustrophobic. Every choice tightens the trap. And then the run keeps asking a brutal follow up question: what happens to the people around Matt? That's where Mila Donovan's story becomes important. Mila isn't just a tragic love interest of Matt's. Her breakdown shows the emotional radiation of Matt's life. Being close to him is dangerous, not just physically, but psychologically. His world bends people. It exposes them to fear, manipulation, trauma, and instability. That's one of Brubaker's best contributions. Daredevil stories often ask whether Matt can survive being Daredevil. Brubaker asks whether anyone close to him can survive Matt being Daredevil. That's a sharper question. And it keeps the run from becoming just Bendis but darker. It becomes about consequences that never stop arriving, which leads directly into the era where Matt finally pushes his worst instincts too far. Shadowland is divisive, and it should be. The setup is that Matt takes control of the hand and tries to use them as a force of good, which is a terrible idea. And also an incredibly Matt Murdock idea. Because Matt has always had this dangerous belief that if he suffers enough, fights hard enough, and takes enough responsibility onto himself, he can force the world into being a better place. So, when he takes over the hand, the problem is not just that he's making a tactical mistake. The problem is that his savior complex has finally found infrastructure to play in. He builds Shadowland in Hell's Kitchen. He becomes more authoritarian, more violent, more convinced that his judgment is necessary because everyone else has failed. The demonic possession angle becomes part of the story, and that's where some readers finally check out. For many people, the most interesting version of Shadowland isn't "the devil made me do it." The most interesting version is Matt Murdock's worst instincts finally found an army. That's the story underneath the event. And even if the execution is uneven, the idea matters because it pushes a long-running Daredevil tension to its endpoint. What happens when a man who believes in justice stops trusting anyone else to deliver it? And the answer is ugly. And after that, Daredevil needs a reset. Not a reset that erases the darkness, a reset that changes how Matt lives with it. And that is where Mark Waid comes in. Mark Waid's run with artists like Paulo Rivera and Chris Samnee is often described as the lighter Daredevil era. And visually, that's true. The book is brighter, more colorful, more adventurous. Matt smiles more. The tone has energy again. But calling it light kind of misses what Waid is actually doing. Waid isn't ignoring Matt's darkness. He's writing Matt Murdock more aggressively, refusing to drown in it. It's different. After years of collapse, exposure, prison, corruption, demonic possession, and emotional wreckage, Matt decides that it's time to perform joy. He becomes more charming, more outwardly upbeat, more playful. And at first, that feels like relief. Then the run slowly reveals that this cheerfulness is also a defense mechanism. And that's why the run works. Waid doesn't reject Daredevil's pain. It interrogates Matt's attempt to outrun it. And that's incredibly fitting for the character because Matt has always been good at weaponizing discipline. Here, he's weaponizing optimism. Oh, the run also does some of the best visual work ever done with Matt's powers. His radar sense, spatial awareness, sound, texture, and perception become storytelling tools in themselves. It remembers that Daredevil's senses are not just a workaround for blindness, they're a completely different relationship with the world. And that matters because too many adaptations and lazy summaries treat Matt like he basically sees. Waid's run understands that he doesn't, he perceives. And that difference is everything. The San Francisco move later in the run also matters because it reframes Matt's public identity and forces him into a different relationship with shame. Instead of living entirely under denial and secrecy, Matt begins trying to live more honestly, which is terrifying for him because Matt Murdock can survive pain. Honesty is harder. That's the sneaky brilliance of Waid's run. It looks like the happy one. It's actually about a man trying to survive long enough for happiness to finally become real. Then you have Charles Soule's run. which brings the legal side of Daredevil back to the center. And that matters because Matt's lawyer identity can sometimes become background decoration if a run leans too hard into ninjas, Catholic guilt, and organized crime. Soule doesn't let that happen. He makes the law itself part of the conflict. Matt becomes a prosecutor, which is a major shift. Traditionally, he's a defense attorney, the guy standing between vulnerable people and a system that can crush them. As a prosecutor, he's now inside the machinery of the state in a different way. That creates tension immediately. Can Matt Murdock pursue justice from inside the system without becoming part of the thing he usually fights? That's a good Daredevil question to ask. Soule also introduces Blindspot, a young immigrant hero who becomes Matt's protege. And Blindspot works because he forces Matt into a mentor role without letting him be comfortable in it. Matt knows how to train someone to survive violence. He's also less reliable when it comes to teaching someone how not to be consumed by it. And then there's Muse. Muse is one of the best modern Daredevil villains because he attacks the character's sensory and moral world at the same time. He turns murder into art. He makes horror into spectacle. For a hero who experiences the world through heightened perception, that's uniquely disturbing. Matt doesn't just encounter the aftermath of the violence, he experiences it in overwhelming detail. But the biggest Soule idea is Mayor Fisk. That is a perfect Daredevil escalation, because Kingpin, becoming mayor, takes everything Matt fears about power and makes it legal. Fisk doesn't have to hide in the shadows anymore. He doesn't have to operate only as a crime boss. He can use legitimacy as a weapon. And that's devastating for Matt, because Matt's whole life is built around the tension between law and justice. Mayor Fisk asks, what if the law belongs to the villain? That's one of the cleanest modern Daredevil problems that you can write. Soule's run isn't always discussed at the same level as Miller or Bendis or even Waid. But what it does is contributes something very important. It makes the courtroom dangerous again. Not as a backdrop, but as a battlefield. Next, you have Chip Zdarsky and Marco Cicchetto's run, which begins with one of the strongest modern Daredevil premises. What if Daredevil accidentally kills someone? That's such a clean, brutal idea because it hits every part of Matt at once. The vigilante, the lawyer, the Catholic, and the man who justifies pain as long as no one dies. Matt's injured, rusty, reckless, and not as in control as he wants to believe. When a criminal dies during one of his interventions, he can't shrug it off. And he shouldn't. This is Matt Murdock, after all. Intent doesn't free him. An accident doesn't comfort him. The fact that he was trying to help almost makes it worse. So the run becomes about accountability, not in an abstract way, in a Matt Murdock way, which means guilt becomes a prison before the actual prison even arrives. Eventually, Matt does go to prison, and Elektra takes on the Daredevil mantle in his absence. That's one of the smartest moves of the run because Elektra as Daredevil is not just a costume swap. It's a moral experiment. Elektra has killed. Matt has not, at least not willingly. The Daredevil symbol means restraint, suffering, protection, and penance. So what happens when someone with Elektra's history tries to carry it? That's interesting. Not because she becomes Matt, because she doesn't. She tests whether the symbol can survive someone with a different moral history inside of it. Then Devil's Reign takes the Mayor Fisk idea and blows it up into a Marvel-wide event. Fisk outlaws superheroes in New York, using the authority of office against vigilantes. That's not just a big crossover hook. That's a Daredevil idea scaled up. Law turned against justice. Power wearing legitimacy. The system becoming the weapon. Then Zdarsky pushes Matt and Elektra into the Red Fist saga, where they tried to build something larger through the fist. It's more mythological, more religious, more divisive, but it makes sense as an endpoint for this version of Matt, because Matt has always been tempted to turn his pain into mission. Zdarsky asks what happens when the mission becomes a movement. And like every good Daredevil answer, it's not clean. After Zdarsky's run wraps up, Saladin Ahmed and Aaron Kuder take over in a run that leans openly into spiritual horror. Matt's been through hell in almost every possible sense, and Ahmed's run makes that internal conflict more literal. Matt is placed in a new religious context. Demons and sins become central, and the story deals with fractured pieces of his soul, the seven deadly sins, in a version of Daredevil where the spiritual symbolism is no longer hiding under the surface. This is both the strength and the risk of the run, because Daredevil has always been about sin, guilt, penance, and the devil imagery sitting uncomfortably next to Matt's faith. Ahmed makes the metaphor walk onto the page with a name tag. When it works, it feels like Matt confronting the accumulated spiritual cost of decades of violence, shame, and resurrection. When it doesn't, it can feel like subtext got tired of being subtext. But the core idea belongs to Daredevil. Matt cannot keep surviving trauma by pretending it doesn't mark him. Eventually, the sins catch up. Eventually, the soul has to be dealt with. That is the Daredevil idea. Even if this era is more overt than some readers prefer, and because this run only recently wrapped, it's worth treating it carefully. It's probably too soon to know how much long term weight it will have compared to Miller, or Nocenti, or Bendis, or Waid, or Zdarsky. But as a spiritual reset, after the Red Fist era, it makes sense. The current Stephanie Phillips and Lee Garbett relaunch is still too new to judge as a defining era. And that's important to say. Not every new status quo deserves to be declared the next major chapter. Just because issue 1 came out and everyone online needed an opinion by lunch. But the setup has potential. Matt Murdock as a law professor is a strong idea because now he's not just practicing law, he's teaching it. And that adds a different kind of pressure to the character. Daredevil has always been about what Matt believes justice should be versus what the world reveals justice actually is. So putting him in front of students forces a different question. What does Matt Murdock teach about justice after spending his entire life watching justice come up short? There's also the new villain Omen, targeting Matt, which gives the run a mystery engine. But the real test is not whether Omen looks cool or whether the relaunch has momentum. The real test is whether the story attacks Matt's contradictions, because that's always the standard with Daredevil. A new villain is fine, a new job is fine, a new number one, fine. But if the story doesn't press on the space between Matt's ideals and Matt's damage, it's just another reset. It's too early to call, but the pieces are there. So the fascinating thing about Daredevil, a lot of major superheroes have one or two definitive runs. Daredevil has an absurd number. Miller, Nocenti, Bendis, Brubaker, Waid, Soule, Zdarsky. It's not an accident. It's because Daredevil has one of the strongest engines in superhero comics.